The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. Elena Martinez stood at the break room sink at 5 in the morning, refilling the coffee carafe with mechanical precision, her hands moving through the ritual they'd performed 10,000 times before. Mercy General Portland was still mostly asleep, the night shift skeleton crew scattered across 12 floors, emergency lights casting the hallways in that particular shade of institutional blue that made everything look like it existed underwater. She wore discount scrubs, the kind that cost $14 a pair, and started pilling after 3 washes. Her name tag read Elena Martinez, RN, in small block letters. Nothing more. Nothing less. The antiseptic smell of the hospital mixed with burnt coffee and something else, the ghost of yesterday's bleach from the mop bucket she'd used in Trauma Bay 2 at midnight. Elena set the carafe down and began organizing the supply cart beside the refrigerator, moving with the fluid efficiency of someone who'd done this exact sequence in 15 different configurations, in the dark, under fire. Alcohol swabs. Gauze pads in ascending sizes. Saline flushes. Syringes. Every instrument positioned for ambidextrous access. A muscle memory from a different lifetime, one she'd spent 5 years learning to forget. Her left hand trembled slightly as she reached for the next box, the tremor that came when her hands were idle, when her mind had time to remember things she'd trained herself not to think about. Faces. Names. The sound that a chest cavity makes when you're running out of time. She gripped the edge of the cart and the tremor stopped. Hands-on work. Hands healing. The tremor had no place in that equation. The break room door swung open and Elena didn't look up. She knew the rhythm of Mercy General's mornings well enough to identify people by their footsteps alone. This was the confident stride of someone who'd never questioned whether they deserved to be anywhere. Dr. Sterling. Chief of Surgery. The kind of doctor whose family tree had probably been hanging in mahogany frames since his grandfather's generation, the kind of privilege that didn't need to prove itself because it had been proven for centuries. He was holding his post-op orders from yesterday, the sheet of paper slightly crumpled in his left hand as he walked toward the table to set down his briefcase. Elena kept her eyes on the gauze boxes, her movements deliberate, unhurried. Dr. Sterling had been at Mercy General for 3 years. In that time, Elena had watched him publicly humiliate 17 nurses, reassign 2 residents for questioning his judgment, and somehow maintain a reputation as a surgeon so exceptional that the hospital board had given him a corner office on the 3rd floor. But she'd also watched him write 50 milligrams when the post-op protocol required 45. Dangerous. Not dramatically so. Not the kind of error that would kill someone. Just the kind that would extend recovery by 3 days, increase infection risk by 0.3%, cost the patient an extra $4,800 in hospital fees. Elena had quietly corrected it on the chart, in her own handwriting, with a date and her initials beside it. Standard nursing protocol. Catching and documenting errors was her job. It was literally written into her scope of practice. Dr. Sterling's head snapped toward her like she'd fired a gun across the room. "Did you touch my orders?" His voice carried the particular edge of a man who'd never been contradicted by someone he'd classified as beneath him. Elena turned, her eyes level but not meeting his. Deferential. Safe. Found a discrepancy in the dosage, doctor. Documented it per protocol. I didn't ask for your documentation. He held the paper up. His fingers were manicured. His watch cost more than Elena's monthly rent. I asked if you touched my orders. Yes, sir. Don't. He set the paper down on the table like it had been contaminated, then turned and left the break room without waiting for a response. The door swung shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss. Elena's jaw tightened, the only visible reaction. One measured breath. Then she returned to the gauze boxes, her hand steady as a surgical laser, her mind already moving through the day's tasks with the compartmentalization of someone who'd learned that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. She finished the supply cart at 5:32. By 6 o'clock, she was pushing it through the corridors of Mercy General, moving past sleeping patients and the night shift nurses beginning to hand things off to the day crew. The hospital at that hour had a particular quality, the air felt heavier, as if all the weight of human suffering was settling deeper into the walls, into the linoleum, into the very foundation of the building. Room for 12 was in the cardiac wing. Elena pushed the cart with her left hand while scanning the room numbers with the efficiency of someone who'd memorized the entire floor layout. The patient in for 12 was a man named Reeves. Grizzle didn't quite capture it. He was weathered the way old leather gets weathered, creased, darkened, shaped by time and pressure and things that didn't have names in ordinary conversation. His left arm was bandaged from shoulder to wrist. His right leg was wrapped in compression stockings. His chart said he'd been admitted 48 hours ago with complications from an old wound, shrapnel migration, the kind of thing that haunted you decades after the original injury. Elena checked his her movements precise and practiced. 14-gauge angiocath in place. Saline running clean. Vitals stable. She adjusted the drip rate with a subtle movement of her wrist that looked casual but wasn't. The patient's eyes opened. He watched her hands. Not her face. Her hands. For exactly 7 seconds, he watched the way her fingers moved across the fall line, the way her right hand steadied the port while her left adjusted the flow rate, the particular economy of motion that came from doing something 300 times under conditions where hesitation meant death. His mouth opened as if to speak. Elena could feel the question forming in the space between them like a living thing. She didn't meet his eyes. She finished adjusting the checked his heart monitor, steady rhythm, sinus rate in the 60s, everything normal, and turned to leave. The patient's hand moved. Not a grabbing motion. Just a shift toward her, a reaching out that stopped short of actual contact. Elena paused. Waited. Her face remained neutral, professional, the expression of a nurse checking on another patient in the ordinary morning protocol of a Portland hospital. Baghdad Regional, the patient said. His voice sounded like gravel being moved by a shovel. 2009. Elena didn't respond. She didn't need to. The statement wasn't a question. It was a recognition, delivered in the particular tone of someone who'd spent 13 years living with the knowledge that they'd survived something they shouldn't have. She left the room without acknowledgement and continued pushing the supply cart down the corridor. Her breathing remained even. Her hands remained steady. The tremor that had been present in the break room hadn't returned. Work was a talisman. Movement was a prayer. As long as she was doing, she didn't have to remember. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she was no longer the only one who knew. By 8 o'clock, Elena was in Trauma Bay 1, helping resupply after the night's emergency cases. The fluorescent lights hummed their particular frequency. The air smelled like iodine and latex and the sharp metallic hint of blood that had been cleaned but never quite disappeared from a hospital trauma bay. She was concentrating on inventory, counting endotracheal tubes, marking the log, replacing expired medications, when Dr. Sterling entered with an attending resident in tow. He wasn't looking at Elena directly. He was looking at the resident, speaking in the casual tone of someone comfortable being overheard. Standards are slipping, he said. We've got floor staff thinking they can second-guess physician orders. That's not a hospital. That's anarchy. He gestured vaguely at the supply cart Elena had just completed restocking. You want to know the difference between a first-class surgical program and a mediocre one? It's maintaining hierarchy. It's knowing who makes the decisions and who follows them. The resident nodded, absorbing the lesson. Elena continued counting endotracheal tubes. The task required no acknowledgement. No reaction. No tremor. This was the architecture of power that had kept men like Sterling untouchable for decades, the casual reinforcement of authority delivered to witnesses, the positioning of dissent as insubordination, the construction of a world where correction was a violation and compliance was respect. Elena finished the count. 42 tubes, all within expiration. She documented it in the log and moved on to the next task. Her shift had 7 more hours. 7 more hours of moving like a shadow through the corridors of Mercy General, of keeping her hand steady and her eyes lowered and her past buried so deep that even she sometimes forgot it had been real. By noon, she was in room for 12 again, checking on Mr. Reeves. His vitals were still stable. His fall was running clean. He was reading a book, some military history text that she recognized from the spine as a book about the Battle of Mogadishu. When she entered, he didn't look up immediately. He let her finish her work, checking his port, verifying his heart rate on the monitor, adjusting the angle of his bed slightly to reduce pressure on his injured shoulder. Only when she was preparing to leave did he speak. "I never got to thank you," he said. His eyes met hers directly. "The aid station. When the mortar hit. You didn't have to stay." Elena paused in the doorway. Her hand rested on the frame, and for just a moment, the tremor returned, not the tremor of anxiety, but the tremor of something being held back, something pressing against the walls of her careful compartmentalization and trying to get out. "You did good work," he continued. "The people you helped. They're out there. They're alive because you didn't leave." Elena took one measured breath. Then another. "How's your pain level?" she asked. Her voice came out steady, professional, the voice of a nurse doing her job. "Manageable," he said. "I'll check with Dr. Sterling about adjusting your medication if needed." She left the room before he could respond, before the walls could crack, before 13 years of carefully constructed distance could collapse in a hospital corridor on a Tuesday morning in Portland. At 2 o'clock, Dr. Sterling was reviewing charts at the nurse's station when he noticed something. The post-op orders from this morning were no longer in his stack. Elena had filed them. She'd done what was supposed to be done, documented the error, submitted the correction, moved forward. But filing meant the error was now part of the permanent record. It meant anyone reviewing his work, anyone auditing his cases, would see that the chief of surgery had written an incorrect dosage and a floor nurse had caught it. He set his coffee mug down on the counter with enough force that the liquid slopped onto the desk. Elena was 3 stations down, charting on a computer terminal. She didn't look up. Didn't acknowledge the sound. The mug hitting the surface hadn't been an accident, and they both knew it. "Looks like we need to talk about scope of practice," Sterling said, loud enough for the other nurses to hear. Loud enough for the residents in the hallway to pause and listen. Some people around here have forgotten what their actual job is. Elena finished typing her chart note. She logged out of the computer. She stood up with a kind of controlled precision that came from years of standing up in situations where standing up was dangerous. Then she turned to face him, her eyes level, her face neutral, her posture absolutely still. She said nothing. She simply waited, the way someone waits who has already survived things that killed other people, who knows that words are often the least powerful weapon in any room. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then Dr. Sterling turned away, picking up his coffee mug and walking back toward his office, already on his phone, already making calls, already beginning the process of ensuring that Elena Martinez understood what happened when you challenged the hierarchy at Mercy General. But that wasn't the worst part either. Dr. Sterling's coffee mug hit the nurse's station like a gunshot. The ceramic shattered across the counter, brown liquid spreading like spilled blood across patient charts. He stood there, hand still extended, breathing hard, watching the faces around him freeze. The resident stopped mid-conversation. A phlebotomist stepped backward. The entire station held its breath. "I'm betting," Sterling announced, his voice sharp enough to cut tile, "that this one doesn't make it through the week. Let's call her Mouse. She doesn't have the spine for real medicine." He turned slowly, scanning the residents, waiting for someone to laugh. No one did. The silence was so thick you could operate in it. He smiled anyway, as if the absence of agreement somehow confirmed his point, and walked back toward his office, already on his phone, already making calls, already certain that Elena Martinez understood what happened when you challenged the hierarchy at Mercy General. That afternoon in the cafeteria, Elena carried her lunch tray through the crowd. The room smelled of institutional beef and ammonia-cleaned floors, the scent of 1,000 shifts compressed into one antiseptic cloud. She'd learned to move like this over 12 years, learned to be the wall that people moved around, not toward. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the tables where doctors sat in clusters, nurses scattered between them like exile colonies. Sterling sat 3 tables from the serving line, his back to her, his phone pressed to his ear. He was talking about budget allocations and something about problematic staff when he saw her in his peripheral vision. His foot extended. Casual. Almost lazy. The tray went down hard. Her shoulders had tensed, muscle memory from IED training, the body's instinctive brace for impact, but her hands stayed soft. The apple slices scattered across the tile like shrapnel. Jello splattered her scrubs in red streaks. 70 people witnessed this. 70 people watched. Sterling looked up from his phone, his expression pleasant, almost concerned. Careful, mouse. Can't have you hurting yourself. His smile was a weapon. He wielded it like men wielded rifles, with authority and zero hesitation. Elena took one measured breath. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. But one tear escaped, just one, and she let it travel down her cheek without brushing it away. She kept her eyes locked on his while she spoke, her voice dropping into that register that men rarely heard from women in this building, that register that came from a place deeper than pride. I've carried wounded men twice your weight through gunfire, Doctor. This is nothing. She knelt on the tile, the same tile where blood had dried on 100 different days in 100 different operating theaters across Baghdad. Her uniform was soaked through with spilled lunch. Her hands didn't shake as she cleaned it, piece by piece, apple slice by apple slice, while Sterling's laughter echoed across the cafeteria like the rattle of brass casings. She could hear him telling someone about the bet, about how long Mouse would last, about how it was pathetic really, how some people just didn't belong in medicine. She didn't flinch. That night, alone in her apartment, she pressed her palm against the scar that ran from her collarbone to her ribs, souvenir from Kandahar, 2011, and let the trembling come. The shaking wasn't fear. It was restraint. It was the controlled fury of someone who had learned long ago that reaction was a privilege she couldn't afford. The next morning, Sterling threw the patient chart at her feet. It hit the tile with a sharp crack, papers cascading. She was standing at the medication dispensary with 4 residents observing her stock the 4 drips. He'd timed it perfectly. Pick that up, sweetheart. His voice was silk over steel. Filing is more your speed than actual medicine. He turned to the nearest resident, a kid no older than 26 with expensive glasses and his father's confidence. Notice how some people know their place. Elena bent slowly. Her hands moved on their own, muscle memory, automaticity, the kind of precision that comes from 1,000 repetitions in 1,000 different contexts. She retrieved the chart, stacked the papers, handed it back to him without meeting his eyes. The residents shifted their weight, uncomfortable but complicit in their silence. Sterling smiled. He'd won that exchange, and they all knew it. But the patient in room for 12 was watching from his wheelchair parked at the hallway intersection. The old man's name was Harrison. Veterans always noticed patterns. They always recognized the signs. During afternoon rounds, when Sterling loudly announced to a gathering of medical students and residents that Mouse probably doesn't even know what pericardiocentesis means, good thing we have real doctors, Harrison watched Elena's jaw tighten by exactly 1 millimeter. He watched her shoulders stay level. He watched her take the insult the way soldiers take orders, without argument, without reaction, without shame. That evening, as Elena was restocking the supply closet on the 4th floor, Harrison stopped his wheelchair in the doorway. His eyes were the color of old copper, sharp and clear. The room smelled like bleach and latex. Outside, Portland rain had started to fall, hammering the windows like it was trying to get in. Baghdad Regional, 2009, he said quietly. You're the medic who saved Captain Reeves when the aid station got shelled. I was there. I watched you work. Elena froze with a box of saline bags in her hands. The fluorescent light above them buzzed like dying insects. I was there, he continued, and I saw what your hands could do. Saw what you refused to quit on. Your senior chief Martinez. Elena's face went white. All the blood drained from it like someone had pulled a drain plug in her chest. She whispered, that person doesn't exist anymore. Please. Harrison nodded slowly. He understood what she was asking. Erasure. A return to the walls. The return to being invisible. For now, he said. He turned his wheelchair around and rolled back down the hallway, back to his room, leaving Elena standing alone in the supply closet, controlling her breathing, practicing the discipline she'd learned in a combat surgical hospital where showing emotion meant someone else died. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, "Call me." She didn't call. Down in the lobby, Dr. Sterling sat in his office with his door closed, phone pressed to his ear, talking to the hospital board chairman about a problematic staff member, about someone who didn't respect protocol, about how the institution needed to demonstrate authority, about how this was going to go one of two ways. His voice had the certainty of a man who had never lost an institutional battle, who had learned early that institutions protect their own, who believed absolutely that money and seniority were forms of armor that nothing could penetrate. He was wrong about that. The rain kept falling. The shift changed. The hospital shifted into evening rhythm, fewer visitors, more machines, the particular quiet of a place where suffering operates on a different schedule. Elena moved through the halls like she always did, pushing the cart, checking the monitors, being the wall that people moved around. She had no idea what was about to walk through those doors. General Marcus Webb walked into Mercy General's lobby with the bearing of a man who'd crossed deserts on foot, his dress uniform crisp despite the Portland rain outside. 72 years old, still 6'3", still commanding every room he entered without trying. A routine follow-up. Chronic chest pain that wouldn't resolve. Probably nothing. The veterans' clinic was on the second floor. He'd made this walk 100 times before, in Baghdad, in Kandahar, in the Pentagon corridors where his name still opened doors. He crossed the threshold at 2:22 p.m. on a Wednesday, and the lobby light seemed dimmer than he remembered. Elena was restocking the crash cart outside Trauma Bay 3 when she heard the sound, not a scream, but something worse. The absence of sound. That sudden, violent quiet that happens when a body betrays itself in public. She turned. General Webb was on the floor. His hand clutched his chest like he was trying to hold something inside that was trying to escape. His aide was shouting. A visitor dropped her coffee. The general's breathing came in short, shallow gasps, the kind of breathing Elena had heard in a field hospital outside Fallujah when shrapnel had done exactly this kind of damage. Within 90 seconds, they came. The first was Dr. Hartley, cardiologist, followed by Dr. Chen from emergency medicine, then the surgical team, Dr. Reeves, Dr. Petal, Dr. Morrison. Then more. And more. By the time they had Webb on a monitor and running an EKG, there were 10 of them in the lobby. 10 white coats circled around the general like pallbearers. The monitor showed the problem immediately, tamponade. The pericardium, the sac around the heart, was filling with blood. The bullet fragment from Baghdad, dormant for 37 years, had finally shifted. Had finally decided today was the day. Pressure dropping. 140/90. Then 120/80. Then 100/70. The walls of the heart were being squeezed. With every beat, Webb's pressure fell. Dr. Hartley looked at the monitor. Then at the general. Then at the others. We need to move him. CT first, then to the OR. Stabilize him during transport. But Dr. Chen was already shaking his head. Transport is contraindicated. Any movement, any jostling, that pericardium ruptures, he's dead in this hallway. His voice had that flat quality it takes on when a doctor has already written the ending in his head. Pressure's at 80/50. We'd never make it upstairs. Then we stabilize here and call for a mobile surgical unit, Dr. Reeves said. But his hand was already moving away from the patient, already reaching for the phone instead of reaching for the tools that might save him. Elena watched it happen. She'd seen it before, in triage, in the moments when doctors calculated odds and found them unacceptable. When the math said failure. When the smart move was to walk away. Dr. Morrison was the first to step back. The tamponade's too unstable for any intervention without immediate surgical support. We're looking at a 2-hour minimum for transport. He turned to the others. There's nothing we can do here that matters. Then Dr. Petal. Agreed. We need a cath lab. We need imaging. This isn't a lobby case. Then Dr. Hartley himself. Get him to Seattle. There's a level 1 trauma center 45 minutes north. Call ahead. They can take the case. He was already walking, his white coat catching air like a sail. I'll document my recommendations. Everything else is above our capability. The general's aide was on the radio. Where's the nearest surgical facility? His voice cracked. General, sir, we're moving you. They're coordinating transport. But there was no transport coming fast enough. Elena could see it in the monitor. The pressure was 70/40 now. The heart couldn't pump effectively when squeezed like this. It was like trying to fill a balloon inside another balloon. At some point, the inner one just stopped working. The general's breathing had become labored. His eyes were starting to lose focus. This was what exsanguination looked like. This was what shock looked like. This was what 15 minutes of oxygen deprivation to the brain looked like. 2 more doctors left. Then another. Then another. One by one, they stepped away from the monitor, away from the general, away from the problem that couldn't be solved in a hospital lobby. Elena counted them as they disappeared down the corridor toward the stairwell, toward their offices, toward their cases with better survival odds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That left Dr. Sterling, who was staring at the monitor with the expression of a man watching his own worst day become somebody else's worst day. And one resident, a 3rd year named Kim, who looked like she was about to cry. The pressure dropped to 60/35. The general's skin had gone the color of old porcelain. Elena moved. She didn't think about it. Thinking was a luxury. She walked toward the gurney, and Dr. Sterling's hand came up like a traffic cop. Step back, mouse. His voice had that edge to it now, the edge of a man whose authority was slipping through his fingers like sand. This is a physician-level situation. You'll contaminate the field. She didn't acknowledge him. She just sidestepped, moving around his arm the way she'd moved around obstacles for 12 years in 2 different countries. 1 step. 2 steps. You're not authorized. His hand went to her shoulder. Elena, I'm serious. Security can be here in seconds. She kept walking. That was when Sterling pulled his phone from his pocket. She heard him dial. She heard him say, "This is Dr. Sterling at Mercy General. I need to speak with Chairman Davison immediately. We have a critical situation. A nurse, Elena Martinez, is attempting to provide medical intervention without authorization or credentials. I have 4 witnesses. I'm documenting this as a scope of practice violation." He paused. "No, I understand. I'll have full documentation by end of shift." "Yes. Yes, she's still here." "No, I'm having her removed now." Elena dropped to her knees beside the gurney. She didn't feel her knees hit the tile. Pain was information, and information was irrelevant. The general was grey now. His pupils were blown. She found the crash cart 2 feet away. She'd stocked it herself 20 minutes ago, before the world changed. The pericardiocentesis kit was where it always was. Sterile field. 18-gauge needle. Syringe. Antiseptic prep. "Someone do something," the aide was shouting. "He's dying. Why isn't anyone?" "Security." Dr. Sterling's voice had gone high now, had gone panicked. He was on his phone again. "State Licensing Bureau, emergency line. This is Dr. Sterling at Mercy General. I'm reporting a nurse for practicing medicine without a license. Patient ID, he gave the general's information. I have documentation. I have witnesses. This is happening right now. Call hospital administration. Call the police if necessary. Elena opened the kit. Her hands didn't tremble. Her hands were steady as surgical steel. She prepped his chest with antiseptic, and the smell of it, that sharp, chemical bite, grounded her in the present tense. The left anterior chest wall between the fourth and fifth ribs. That was the window. That was always the window. She'd opened it 212 times in her life, and her hands remembered every single one. The patient from room 412, the Army Ranger, had wheeled his chair closer. He whispered so quietly only Elena could hear, subsiphoid approach. 15-degree angle. That Special Forces medic protocol. Only saw it once before. Elena felt him watching. She felt the weight of his recognition. The needle advanced slowly, angling toward the left shoulder, the technique muscle memory had preserved in the deep parts of her brain where PTSD couldn't reach. The syringe filled. Dark blood. Dangerous blood. The blood that was killing the general, one compressed heartbeat at a time. 10 cubic centimeters. She withdrew the needle slightly. 30 cubic centimeters. She adjusted the angle. 60 cubic centimeters. The general gasped, actually gasped, like something inside him had suddenly uncompressed. 90 cubic centimeters. The syringe was full. She withdrew the needle. The monitor beeped. A single beat. Then another. Then another. The blood pressure rose. 75/50. The aide on his knees was sobbing. 85/55. The general's eyes came back into focus. They found Elena's face. 95/60. That was when the security guards appeared at the lobby entrance, radios crackling static on their belts. Dr. Sterling was pointing. His phone was still in his hand. His fourth call was already being placed. Elena could hear him talking to someone at the State Licensing Bureau, his voice tight with vindication and rage, the voice of a man who'd finally caught his prey in an act of insubordination so blatant, so public, so witnessed, that there was no way it could be defended. That nurse, Sterling said, pointing at Elena, still on her knees beside the general who was still dying and then wasn't dying anymore. Remove her from the premises. She practiced beyond her scope of licensure and I have 4 witnesses. I'm filing formal complaints with the State Medical Board and requesting immediate investigation. The guards were walking toward her. The general was breathing. Dr. Sterling stepped into the gap between Elena and the gurney, his white coat flaring like a cape. Step back, mouse. This is a physician-level situation. His voice carried the weight of 17 years unchallenged, of every resident who'd flinched at his name, of a hierarchy that had never once bent. Elena didn't pause. Didn't acknowledge. She sidestepped him with the fluidity of someone who'd navigated much narrower spaces under far worse conditions, ducking through doorways while rounds snapped overhead, moving through the dark with her hands extended, feeling for the wounded before her eyes could find them. Sterling's hand shot out. She was already past it. The gurney was 3 feet away. General Webb's pressure sat at 60/40ths, the monitor screaming its metallic panic into the fluorescent air. His skin had taken on the grey-white pallor of a man whose blood had no place to go, trapped behind a membrane that pressed against his heart like a fist closing. 97, 93 years old, 4 stars, 3 tours, and none of it mattered now. Only the physics mattered. Only the pressure. Elena dropped to her knees beside the gurney without breaking stride. The pericardiocentesis kit was already open in her hands. She'd grabbed it 3 seconds after General Webb hit the floor, muscle memory from a different life, a different uniform, a different version of herself that still knew what to do when the world started shutting down. Hand steady as a surgical laser. That's what they'd called her in Baghdad when the aid station got hit and Captain Reeves was drowning in his own blood and the morphine needle had punched through his chest wall with her name on it. She palpated the angle of his ribs, found the intercostal space between the 4th and 5th rib, mid-clavicular line. The 18-gauge needle was already in her fingers. The antiseptic wipe had been in her pocket for reasons she'd stopped examining years ago. She swabbed the skin and didn't think about how many times she'd done this in the sand with nothing but moonlight and the sound of incoming rounds walking closer, step by step, round by round. "Stop her! Security!" Sterling's voice cracked like breaking glass. He was moving, reaching for her, but Elena was already past the moment where he could touch her. The needle went in with the faintest resistance. That was the pericardial membrane, just like it was in the simulations, just like it was in the reality of 200 saves where the alternative was death. She advanced a millimeter. The needle kissed the sac. Her thumb on the plunger, steady as a sniper's breath. The hiss of air escaping. Fluid under pressure, bright red, darker than blood should be. The needle was drawing it out, vacuum releasing, the fist loosening its grip on General Webb's heart. 90 cc. 100. 110. The general's face was still grey, but his eyes snapped open. His chest expanded. His lungs were pulling air again. 90 cc of fluid. That was the difference between alive and dead. That was the exact weight of the space between one breath and none. Security was running now. Sterling was screaming something that sounded like authority but had lost all its power. Elena held the syringe aloft, still connected by the needle, the fluid catching the light like something holy. General Webb's pressure was coming up. 84/51. 89/55. The monitor screen was becoming almost musical, a rhythm instead of chaos. "Get her away from him," Sterling commanded, and his voice was different now. Not angry. Afraid. He could see it happening in real time, the general stabilizing, the crisis resolving, the proof that Elena Martinez had just done what 10 physicians had declared impossible. She'd reached into the chest of a 4-star general and found the thing that was killing him and removed it with a needle and her hands and knowledge that lived in her muscle memory like scars. Security arrived in the form of 2 men in grey uniforms, but the general was breathing now with color returning to his face, and the cardiothoracic team was already being called, and for the moment nothing could undo what Elena had just accomplished. She withdrew the needle with the same precision she'd inserted it, replaced the syringe in its packaging, and stood without wiping her hands. Blood on her scrubs. Drops of General Webb's blood, which would matter for the paperwork, which would become documentation, which would become evidence. Sterling was already moving away, his phone in his hand. She watched him dial. She knew the sequence because she'd seen this coming from the moment she'd corrected his dosage order 3 weeks ago and he'd decided she was a threat. First call, the hospital board chairman. Second call, the state licensing bureau. Third call, a number that made his voice drop to something quieter, something that sounded like revenge being ordered from a restaurant with white tablecloths. Fourth call, someone who kept files on people, who made calls when important men needed help erasing problems. Elena didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood in her scrubs with blood on her chest and let the room reorganize around her, the general being stabilized, prepped for the OR, already on his way to the cardiothoracic suite where the real surgeons could close him up properly. The mission would be finished by people with credentials and titles and the kind of authority that came from diplomas on walls. Her mission was already over. She'd never even started it, in the way that mattered to Dr. Sterling. The administrator arrived 43 minutes later with 2 security guards and the expression of someone who'd been on a phone call with an angry board member. She was a woman named Dr. Reeves, no relation to Captain Reeves, a different war, a different death, and her voice when she spoke to Elena was precisely modulated, the kind of professional courtesy that precedes termination. "Ms. Martinez, you're dismissed effective immediately. Surrender your badge." Elena removed it from her neck. The security badge with her photo, taken on her second day, hair in regulation style, smile that didn't reach her eyes. She handed it over without words. Words wouldn't help. Words never did. "I've also contacted the State Licensing Bureau," Dr. Reeves continued, reading from a document that Sterling had clearly provided. "We'll be investigating the unauthorized practice of medicine. Your previous employers are being contacted." There are questions about your employment history and credentials. Sterling appeared beside the administrator like smoke. His phone was in his hand and his face had taken on the expression of someone who'd made something final happen. The private investigator confirmed it, he said softly, for Elena's ears. Your references don't check out. Your employment record has gaps. You've been lying about who you are. She had. The moment she'd decided to disappear, she'd become a different person. She'd cut the corners off her life and filed the edges smooth, made herself into someone who could work in a hospital without anyone asking questions, without anyone seeing the weight she carried or the reasons for it. Elena Martinez, the civilian nurse. Not the one who'd held a man's intestines while a medic ran to get more blood. Not the one who'd taught 12 nurses how to pack a wound with hemostatic gauze while mortars walked through the compound. Not the one who'd carried Captain Reeves 300 yards through a fire zone to reach a helicopter that might save his life. Elena the nurse removed her badge and followed security to her locker. The cardboard box was institutional, the kind used for supplies, stamped with the hospital logo. She didn't own much. A cracked mug that said "World's Okayest Nurse" in faded letters. It had been a gift from the night shift 3 years ago, and she'd kept it because it was kind and because kindness was something she'd stopped recognizing as possible for herself. A dying succulent that she'd kept alive through 5 transfers between apartments, 3 jobs, and a life that had no room for growing things. She'd watered it every Sunday. She didn't know why. Maybe because something in her still believed that the right care could make something small survive. And the photograph. For Faces. Baghdad, 2009. Al-Rashid Surgical Hospital, the aid station on the northern edge of the compound. Her team. 3 of them were circled with black marker. 2 tours later, only 2 of the faces ever came home. She placed the photo on top of the mug on top of the succulent, and security escorted her to the staff entrance. The rain was coming down in sheets, the kind of Portland rain that felt like the sky was dissolving. Elena sat at the bus stop across from Mercy General's main entrance, the cardboard box on her lap, her scrub soaked through, blood and rain running together in the creases of her hands. The box was falling apart. Water seeping through the bottom. The succulent's last leaf detached itself and floated down into the wet cardboard like something surrendering. She watched it sink. Behind her, in Dr. Sterling's office, the documentation was being assembled. Credentials fraud. Practicing beyond scope. Unprofessional conduct. He was on the phone again, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a man who'd finally removed a threat. By the morning, 3 licensing boards would have opened files. By next week, she would be permanently barred from practicing medicine in Oregon, Washington, and California. Elena's charge nurse, the kind one, the one who'd brought her coffee when she'd worked the brutal double shifts, the one who'd sat with her during the one time Elena had cried at work, in the supply closet, for exactly 90 seconds before pulling herself back together, watched from a window in the patient recovery ward, tears streaming down her face. Elena sat in the rain. The box decomposing. The weight of being fired pressing down with exactly the same pressure that the fluid pressing on General Webb's heart had done. Heavy. Suffocating. Physics. Then her phone buzzed. A text from a number with a 619 area code. San Diego. Naval Base. A voice coming across to her through the rain, through 5 years of hiding, through the careful constructed walls of a life that had never actually been real. We know where you are. The General is asking for you. 72 hours. The rain continued. Elena's hands didn't shake. Hands that had held lives together didn't tremble at things like unemployment or police reports or the end of something that had never been supposed to work anyway. She opened the text again. Read the coordinates embedded in the next message. Mercy General. 3 days. That was how long they were giving her. Not asking. Telling. The way military precision works, the way people who've been trained to move with purpose communicate across the broken spaces. 72 hours after security escorted her out, Elena was restocking shelves at a 24-hour pharmacy on Division Street, wearing a blue vest with a name tag that read Ellen. Her hands moved through the motions, bottles of cough syrup, antihistamines, ibuprofen, each one placed with the same precision she'd once used to insert chest tubes. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like insects trapped in plastic. A mother and child walked past her. Neither looked. That was the point. Anonymity. The erasure she'd chosen. The life she'd built on forgetting. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Elena? A voice she recognized. Her former charge nurse, the one who'd witnessed Sterling throw the chart. Elena, you need to come back to Mercy General. Right now. Don't ask questions. Just come. The line went dead. Elena clocked out without changing. The pharmacy vest stayed on as she drove through Portland's rain-slicked streets, her mind running through scenarios. Security issue. Another patient emergency. Something she'd missed in the pericardiocentesis follow-up. She'd saved General Webb's life. She'd violated protocol doing it. The math was simple, good outcome plus rule breaking equals termination. She'd accepted that algebra the moment she pulled the needle free. She walked into the Mercy General lobby at 4:27 p.m. and stopped moving. Two Black Hawks sat on the helipad, rotors still spinning. Military personnel in dress uniforms filled the atrium, Navy, Army, Air Force. And there, beside General Webb's wheelchair, stood a Navy SEAL commander in pressed whites, holding a pair of worn combat boots in his hands. Not new boots. Lived-in boots. Scuffed leather creased with 1,000 movements. Boots that had walked through Baghdad heat and Kandahar dust. Elena's name was stenciled on the side in faded white letters, Martinez. The room shifted. 40, maybe 50 people turned to look at her. Staff members she'd worked with for 2 years. Residents who'd watched Sterling humiliate her. A news crew with cameras. Hospital administrators in blazers. General Webb reached forward from his wheelchair, and when he did, the sea of uniforms parted like water. A Marine Corps captain in dress blue stepped forward. General Webb's daughter. She looked at Elena with eyes that held something like recognition, like mourning, like pride compressed into a single moment. Senior Chief Petty Officer, she said, voice cracking. We've been looking for you for 7 years. Since you disappeared. The resident who'd watched Sterling throw the chart, trembling now, actually trembling, read from a file he held. His voice shook as he spoke. Navy Cross. Bronze Star with Valor. Second Bronze Star with Valor. Joint Service Commendation Medal. Purple Heart. Combat Medical Badge. Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez served 237 combat missions in Baghdad, Helmand Province, and Kandahar. 37 lives documented saved under direct fire. Classification level, he stopped. Looked at the SEAL commander. The SEAL commander nodded once. He raised his voice for the cameras, for the witnesses, for the record. Navy Cross, he said. Elena watched her own life pronounced in formal military cadence. Bronze Star with Valor. Another breath. Second Bronze Star with Valor. The words landed like salutes. Like recognition. Like everything she'd buried for 5 years was being exhumed in front of 200 people who'd known her as the quiet nurse who filed charts. That's when Dr. Sterling walked out of the OR. He was still in scrubs, still carrying the authority of his white coat, still believing the world operated on his terms. He saw the uniforms. He saw the cameras. He saw the boots in the SEAL commander's hands. His face went the color of old bone. A 2-star admiral stepped forward. His voice came out like a command, flat and carrying the weight of institutional power. Dr. Sterling. You terminated the woman who saved 4-star General Marcus Webb's life when 10 of your colleagues abandoned him. The words hung in the atrium. 10 doctors. The exact number Elena had watched turn away. You're fired, effective immediately. I'm personally ensuring your conduct review follows you to every hospital, every clinic, every medical board in this country. Sterling's mouth opened. Nothing came out. You spent more time calling a private investigator to fabricate evidence than you spent trying to save a dying general. The Admiral's voice didn't rise. That made it worse. Security will escort you out. The same two guards who'd walked Elena to the parking lot 3 days ago approached Sterling. He pointed at Elena with a hand that looked smaller than it had in the cafeteria. She violated protocol. General Webb raised one hand from his wheelchair. It was a small movement. It was everything. She saved my life, son. 10 doctors walked away. She walked forward. The hospital administrator stepped up beside the Admiral. Dr. Sterling, your badge is surrendered. Your parking privilege is revoked. Your medical credentials are suspended pending investigation by the State Board, the DEA, and federal oversight. She looked at the cameras. She was making sure this was on record. 3 state medical boards will receive copies of your conduct file by end of business today. The resident who'd watched Sterling throw the chart found his courage. His voice carried through the lobby. He called her mouse. He tripped her in the cafeteria. He threw a patient chart at her feet in front of the entire nursing staff. Others corroborated. A resident. A maintenance worker. Captain Reeves, wheeling forward from room for 12. The charge nurse. One by one, witnesses stepped forward and spoke his name with the same tone you'd use to name a stain that wouldn't come out. Sterling's face went from pale to scarlet. Veins appeared on his neck like geography no one wanted to explore. He looked at Elena one more time, and in that moment, he finally saw her. Not the quiet nurse in scrubs. Not the woman he could bully. He saw a 4-star general's gratitude. A Navy SEAL commander holding combat boots. An admiral's public condemnation. He saw the exact moment his career became a historical event. Security escorted him toward the exit, the same route Elena had taken 3 days earlier. But Sterling wasn't carrying a cardboard box with a succulent and a photo. He was carrying nothing. They took his badge. His parking pass. His keys. By the time the doors closed behind him, Dr. Sterling was nobody. By the following month, nobody was exactly what he was. He sat at a folding table outside a grocery store on the edge of Portland, wearing a cheap suit from a discount chain, selling supplemental insurance policies to people who walked past without looking. His phone rang constantly with hospitals rejecting his applications. When customers asked what he used to do, he couldn't form the answer. The memory of the lobby, the uniforms, the Admiral's voice, it had become something he couldn't speak aloud. But that wasn't the moment Elena was standing in. The moment Elena was standing in was this: General Webb reached up from his wheelchair and saluted her, a 4-star general, one hand to his forehead, holding the position with the precision of 4 decades in uniform. The hospital erupted into applause that sounded like rain on a tin roof, like hail, like the acoustic event of being seen. Elena stood in her pharmacy vest and walked forward. Her charge nurse squeezed her hand as she passed. Captain Reeves wheeled closer. I'm Captain Reeves. You saved my life in Baghdad 2009 when the aid station got shelled. I've been looking for you for 15 years to say thank you. Elena didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her composure finally released, not with tears, but with something deeper. A slow exhale. Her shoulders rising to full height for the first time in 5 years. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint finally surrendering. The SEAL commander handed her the boots. Elena took them and held them against her chest like they were something sacred. They were. They were evidence that everything she'd done in Baghdad was real. That the 37 lives she'd saved mattered. That Senior Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez hadn't died when she hung up her uniform. The charge nurse placed something in her hands, a new badge. Director of Emergency Medical Training, Mercy General. If you want it. The hospital administrator stepped forward. We're building a combat medicine program. We want you to lead it. Elena looked at the camera. She looked at the crowd. She looked at General Webb's daughter with her hand over her heart. She put on the combat boots. They still fit. They would always fit. I didn't stop being a warrior when I took off the uniform, she said, and her voice carried through the lobby like a command. I just changed weapons. The applause started again. The news cameras caught everything. The headline wrote itself before anyone left the building: decorated combat medic fired for saving general's life. Then this happened. 6 months later, Elena stood in a teaching room at Mercy General, showing a group of residents the subxiphoid approach to pericardiocentesis. Behind her on the wall hung 3 items: her Navy Cross, her Bronze Stars, and a framed photograph of her Baghdad team, 3 of whom never made it home. On her desk sat the succulent, now thriving. On her feet sat the boots. She looked at a nervous medical student and delivered the words that would change how he saw medicine forever: sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns. The student nodded. He understood. Finally, someone had shown him what strength looked like when it wore scrubs and moved with the confidence of someone who'd already survived the worst that war and medicine could offer. Elena Martinez walked these corridors now in full height, a warrior no longer hiding in plain sight, teaching the next generation that the quietest person in the room might just be the one holding all of us together. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your worth, subscribe to this channel. Like this video. Comment what you would have done in Elena's position. Share it with someone who needs to remember that heroes walk among us. And hit that notification bell, because next week we're bringing you another story about hidden strength, unexpected power, and the cost of seeing people as they really are, not as we assume them to be.